Throughout history, as humans spread across the world, infectious diseases have been constant companions. Even in this modern era, outbreaks are perpetual. Here are some of history's most deadly pandemics, from the Antonine Plague to COVID-19. The Antonine Plague of 165 to 180 AD was the first known pandemic impacting the Roman Empire, possibly contracted and spread by soldiers who were returning from campaigns in the Near East. Scholars generally believe that the plague was smallpox, although measles has also been suggested. Estimates of the fatalities from the pandemic range from 2% to 33% of the Roman Empire's population, with deaths between 1.5 million to 25 million people. The smallpox pandemic of 1520 killed between 40 to 50 million people, including an estimated 90% of Native Americans. It's believed to have played a big part in facilitating their conquest. But by far the biggest mass murderer of all pandemics is Black Death, or the bubonic plague of 1347 to 1351. It originated in rats and spread to humans through infected fleas. This outbreak wiped out a whopping 30 to 50% of Europe's population, a death toll so bad that it took more than 200 years for the continent's population to recover. By the time the pandemic ended, more than 200 million souls had perished. The biggest pandemic in terms of spread, however, has been 2019's COVID-19, which so far has claimed nearly 6 million lives. While this figure is significantly less than Black Death, its global and economic impact left the whole world in a race to find a vaccine. Pharmaceutical companies like Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson developed mRNA vaccines, which have proved to be very successful in fighting the virus. The Tertiary Education Trust Fund was proactive in its fight against COVID-19, having a great epiphany that Nigeria must not be left behind in the search for a cure. TETFund not only provided palliatives for those economically affected by the pandemic, but it inspired academic and medical researchers to immediately begin work on a homegrown vaccine. These are the chronicles of the journey to institutionalize research and development in Nigeria. Hello, and welcome to this edition of TETFund, The Paradigm Shift. I am Stanley Bentu. At the end of 2019, in the Wuhan city of China, a virus was discovered after several cases of pneumonia were reported in the area. Now, this virus was unknown to mankind at the time, but within a short period, the entire world was engulfed in a full-scale pandemic that would alter the way that we did a lot of things. So began the COVID-19 pandemic. Nigeria went into lockdown sometime in March of 2020, and in the face of our greatest fear, the Executive Secretary of TETFund, Professor Suleiman Elias Bogoro, was vindicated for insisting that Nigeria must make a huge investment in research and development if it is to survive in the world of a knowledge economy. But the Executive Secretary didn't just sit back and say, "Hey, I told you so." He galvanized his team towards two objectives. The first helping those most affected to cope with the undesired effect of the lockdowns through palliative support. And the second was to ensure that TETFund supports the development of ventilators to save lives and also prototype vaccines that can fight the virus. Such was the belief that Professor Bogoro had in the intellect of the Nigerian academia that he dared to believe while others were paralyzed by doubt. Here is the ES as he was speaking on TETFund's COVID-19 intervention efforts.
We discovered that along the line for quite some time, the human medical experts have been operating without much collaboration with their veterinary counterparts. But with infectious diseases, it begs the question as to why they should remain in their cells, in their silos. No, you need each other. And most of infectious diseases, a number of them, as it were, are zoonotic. And if they are, but that is even one reason. Well, that is one fundamental reason why the veterinarians and human medical experts should work together. But look at in testing results. After laboratory certification of an intended drug or vaccine, you do laboratory tests, and then there are clinical tests for validation. And after that, you now go to the regulators at the global level, World Health Organization, etc. Pharmaceutical, yes. This is very important. And at no time in recent years have we had the challenge of pharmaceuticals. As with the issue of vaccines now, am I right? Drugs, yeah. For most of last year, we were praying that eventually some vaccines would be confirmed by the World Health Organization having been clinically certified to be applied to you and me. Most of the time, we started with some, drugs, as it were, right? As much as possible, and a lot of research work has been going on, especially photogenic drugs, as it were. You better imagine that. And then, like I said about vaccine, the storage of vaccine requires, prescribed temperatures. And in most cases, below zero, far below zero. And especially for Pfizer vaccine, you're talking about -70, as it were. And it's for other vaccines that it may not be as low as that.
To make sure that at least people were stabilized. But that's supposed to be for a very short period of time. You agree with me that COVID has been with us for more than a year now. So the first thing we did is that, okay, can we be part, we were invited by the NCDC. In fact, actually, we created it together to be part of what we call the National COVID-19 Research, initially consortium, but now coalition, as approved by the Corporate Affairs Commission, which is registering the entity. And in this entity, we have nothing less than 35 to 50 institutions, cutting across academia, industry, government. For us, that is the first modeling of triple helix in this country, to see how we can work together. The steering committee is made up of the DG of NIMA, Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, that of NCDC, and we have ES of TETFund, ES of NUC, then two private sector leaders, President of Manufacturing Association of Nigeria, and that of the CEO of Nigerian Economic Summit Summit Group. All of them were part of this. They are the steering committee, and you can see, like I mentioned, how balanced it was, academia, government, and we had a presentation to the Honorable Minister of State for Health on this particular assignment, sometimes last year, which wholeheartedly were adopted. In short, what TETFund did was that when a lot of people were in disarray, TETFund offered to host the secretariat, the national secretariat of that National COVID-19 Research Coalition. And here we have contribution of staff from NCDC, we have some from TETFund, and we have been working together. More importantly is that we look at the roadmap according to the World Health Organization, and we have like 10 pillars from issues that has to do with diagnosis, to candidate therapeutics, to candidate vaccine, to issue of ethics, down the line like that.
Well, the world breathed a sigh of relief towards the end of 2020 when Pfizer, followed shortly by Moderna, announced the development of vaccines that would effectively end the virus over time. But this relief was short-lived, as it was noticed that while countries that developed these vaccines hoarded them for their citizens, others who were rich and powerful spent billions and used their diplomatic advantage to scoop up as much as they could for their own citizens. The developing world, Africa in particular, was largely excluded from this initial scramble, except for token vaccines which were donated to the continent, but were nowhere near the quantity required to make a difference. This behavior was mind-boggling, especially when you consider that the World Health Organization warned against vaccine nationalism, insisting that for the world to be truly free of COVID-19, everyone needs equal access.
We all hope to have good news about a vaccine for COVID-19. But if and when we have an effective vaccine, we must also use it effectively. In our interconnected world, if people in low and middle income countries miss out on vaccines, the virus will continue to kill and the economic recovery globally will be delayed. So, using vaccines as a global public good is in the national interest of each and every country.
But did the world listen? No, it didn't. Many developed countries responded emotionally and politically rather than scientifically and strategically. And we ended up having a second, third, fourth, and even a fifth wave of the pandemic as various strains ranging from Delta to Omicron emerged. Now, speaking of Omicron, Africa woke up to a rude shock when, in the wake of the South Africa's discovery of the variant due to diligent scientific work, rather than being commended for prompt reporting, some Western countries simply shut their doors to African travelers, in spite of the fact that it wasn't even clear whether that variant originated in Africa at all. Well, the co-chair of the African Union Vaccine Delivery Alliance, Dr. Ayaode Alakija, was outraged and very vocal about this and vaccine nationalism that preceded it. Let's take a look.
It was absolutely inevitable. And may I say firstly that had the first SARS-CoV virus, the one that was first identified in China last year, originated in Africa, it is now clear that the world would have locked us away and thrown away the key. There would have been no urgency to develop vaccines because it would have been expendable. Africa would have become known as the continent of COVID. What is going on right now is inevitable. It's as a result of the world's failure to vaccinate in an equitable, urgent, and speedy manner. It is as a result of hoarding by high-income countries of the world. And quite frankly, it is unacceptable. These travel bans are based in politics and not in science.
Dr. Alakija does make a compelling point in another interview, this time with Al Jazeera. And the point she made serves as an argument which justifies TETFund's efforts on the focus on research and development.
You see, until the lion learns to write, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And we need to begin to shape our own narrative. So that is why that clip on BBC was so pointed and it was firm. I wouldn't say that I was angry. I mean, I'm mildly, like I think everybody else, mildly baffled and mildly outraged. Anger is probably not the right word about what exactly is going on. We are being led not by science, but by politics. It is time to take back the narrative and to own our truth and tell our own story. The narrative that Africa has largely escaped the pandemic and therefore, we can delay giving them vaccines, or we can, or that people are vax hesitant and therefore we don't really need to give them vaccines. We need to change that narrative because our economies are suffering. This is no longer just a health crisis. This is an economic crisis. It's a social crisis. It's a health security issue for sure. But most of all, it is becoming a political crisis. And what I called for yesterday was for African leaders to also speak up against vaccine apartheid, to speak up against therapeutics apartheid, to speak up against diagnostics apartheid.
Until the lion learns to write, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. A very poignant point, spoken in true African fashion, wrapped in a proverb by Dr. Alakija. And the meaning of it is that unless and until Nigeria can develop our own applied research, our own technology, our own health advancement, and our own economic strength from within, we risk being shut out and even blamed for issues that are no fault of ours. So what has TETFund done that is in line with the lion learning how to write? Let's find out from this next report put together by the Paradigm Shift production team.
A vaccine is a biological preparation that provides active acquired immunity to a particular infectious disease. A vaccine typically contains an agent that resembles the disease-causing microorganism and is often made from weakened or killed forms of the microbe, its toxins, or one of its surface proteins. The Tertiary Education Trust Fund, as part of its paradigm shift towards research and development, has not only been working to make the case for continual increase in research funding, but also for the implementation of a triple helix model, with the government, the industry, and the academia working together for technological advancement. As part of its medium to long-term efforts to counter the COVID-19 pandemic, TETFund commissioned 6 research and development programs and projects aimed at drug discovery and development of the candidate's therapeutic, diagnostic tools, ventilator, and repurposing of drugs. The National Food and Drug Administration and Control, that's NAFDAC, University of Ibadan, Usman Danfodio University, the University of Kano, Nnamdi Azikiwe University, and the Kaduna Polytechnic were all funded solely for this purpose. As a prolific researcher, TETFund's executive secretary, that's Professor Ilaya Suleiman Bogoro's professional instincts, were promptly alerted by COVID-19, refreshing his well-considered conviction that research on problem-solving suitable for our Nigerian content and the environmental growth are the best options for industrial development.
I'd like to put on record that TETFund was actually one of those groups that were foresighted enough to begin to look in this direction even before the pandemic hit the shores of the country. Myself and a few other colleagues for close to a decade now had been preaching the mantra for us to start to develop local solutions to problems that come up in our settings, and that's why we came up with the concept of medicine security. So kudos to TETFund for being one of the forerunners in that particular arena to identify that there is an urgent and important need for Nigerian scientists to be in a position where we can contribute to addressing our own healthcare needs. Now, it's obviously early days, so we can't say exactly how much the RDSC and the foundation that will come out has been able to contribute to COVID, the response to the COVID pandemic. But already, the signs are there. Currently, the nation, as well as the rest of Africa, is suffering for our lack of capacity to develop vaccines and other relevant interventions. However, some of the key issues that have come up in the pharmaceuticals group, as well as in other cross-cutting groups that we have engaged with, have indicated that, number one, phytomedicines is an area where Nigeria has a comparative advantage. and where we need to start building capacity. We need to start ramping up capabilities so that we can start harnessing those capabilities. You may be aware that the agency, which I head, recently developed a phytomedicine called Niprimune, which is based on the plant Andrographis paniculata, and we're pushing to go to clinical trials for COVID-19 for that particular drug. Our colleagues in Thailand, who incidentally have had better funding, already use that particular phytomedicine to manage COVID-19. And so that's the importance of what TETFund is doing today, bringing doctors, pharmacists, and all other professionals that can contribute to undertaking successful clinical trials, as well as providing a mechanism for ready and available funding for those clinical trials to be expedited. If all those things are in place, the next time we have a pandemic, we won't be looking to the West for responses.
Determined to ensure that Nigeria is listed as one of the African countries with the capacity for vaccinology, TETFund structured a special intervention to change the narrative. 3 national institutions were given priority for vaccine development. They are the National Medical Research Institute in Lagos, the National Veterinary Research Institute in Jos, and the National Institute for Pharmaceutical Research and Development in Abuja. As Nigeria intensified its quest for local vaccine production, drug development, and gene sequencing, 3 of its universities undertaking research in the areas have received the World Health Organization certification for advancement to the next stage of their research work. Additionally, TETFund has approved 6 COVID-19 research grants to the tune of over 200 million naira in support of the Presidential Task Force, that's the PTF, on COVID-19. For Nigeria to be able to produce a vaccine, the intervention from TETFund must be a perpetual initiative. Nigeria must think long-term in 25-year cycles, and billions must be spent for scientists in the country to continue to undertake research and development in our medicinal plan, and then we'll be able to come up with our own vaccine. Nigeria's companies and the private sector should also step up to fund research and development in Nigeria, as the government can simply not do it alone.
Well, it seems that the faith that TETFund has invested in Nigeria is paying off. Nigeria and 5 other African countries have been chosen by the World Health Organization to begin production of COVID-19 vaccines, with the continent having had limited access to jabs. mRNA technology will be shared with Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. According to the WHO, they were selected as the first recipient of the technology from the organization's global mRNA vaccine hub, in a push to ensure that the African continent can make its own jabs to fight COVID-19 and other diseases. The Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, announced this about a week ago at the African Union Summit in Brussels.
Than 80% of the population of Africa is yet to receive a single dose. Much of this inequity has been driven by the fact that globally vaccine production is concentrated in a few mostly high-income countries. One of the most obvious lessons of the pandemic, therefore, is the urgent need to increase local production of vaccines, especially in low and middle-income countries. Today, I'm delighted to announce the first 6 African countries that will receive technology from the hub to produce their own mRNA vaccines: Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. WHO will work with the companies and the government in each country to develop a roadmap for training and production based on their needs and capacities.
The lack of a market for vaccines produced in Africa is something that should be concerning to all of us. Organizations such as COVAX and Gavi need to commit to buying vaccines from local manufacturers instead of going outside of those hubs that will have been set up to go and buy vaccines for distribution to the African continent again.
Well, I took note of the comment that was made in that video clip that you just saw by the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa. He instantly recognized the opportunities that can suddenly become available to African industries if we successfully become manufacturers and producer nations. The potential is not only for our local consumption, but for export. Africa can kick poverty out and survive by producing all that it needs to consume, but Africa and Nigeria can thrive by exporting our finished products to markets abroad. This needs to be our target. And that is the paradigm shift. Join us again on the next edition of the program, but until then, thank you for stopping by. Good night.